Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Deb Swanson and I'm hosting this session of TLC. At this time, I'd like to introduce two instructional designers, Yvonne Donald and Jeffrey Simmons, and their presentation, The Intentional Use of Multimedia in the Course. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Deb. Jeff and I are very excited to be here today to present to you. Some of you may have had the opportunity to attend two webinars from our colleagues yesterday. And those webinars showed some innovative multimedia pieces that could be created and used in courses, CGI, as well as a multimedia creation platform called H5P. Presentations were completed by Michelle Leclerc, Dan Hughes, Jeff here, and Sarah Sanganini. While those presentations show some innovative multimedia pieces that can be created, we're going to kind of focus on the process of how to integrate multimedia in the course and create it so that it's intentional and purposeful today. But before we start that, we'll go ahead and provide you some brief introductions of ourselves. Oops. All right, Jeff.
Oh, yes. Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm an instructional designer. I'm pursuing my PhD at the local University of San Diego, and that's going to be on feedback of the type from multiple choice questions and tests. And so I'm testing out in that environment how whether or not multimedia as a feedback type produces significant changes in pre and post testing. But also I'm interested in virtual reality, augmented reality that's coming at us, augmented reality being the more information overlays over the real world. And my questions are kind of focusing on critical thinking. How can we create a space for critical thinking to occur in a stream of information as they're coming in? So we have a lot of challenges from media coming at us, but today we're going to focus on the more nuts and bolts of the process.
Awesome, thanks, Jeff. And as you guys know, my name is Yvonne Donald. I am an instructional designer that supports course curriculum and at times will develop multimedia pieces. Prior to that, I worked for AAA as an instructional designer that was primarily responsible for developing training curriculum. And even prior to that, I was an academic advisor supporting Ashford University students. And I do have an MBA and a Master's of Arts in Teaching and Learning with Technology from the University of Phoenix and Ashford University, respectively. So we are going to go ahead and get started here. Our objectives for today will be to summarize the process of backwards design. We want to set that foundation so you can understand how multimedia creation fits within that process. Then we are going to discuss the intentional use of multimedia in the course and some best practices, and you'll get an opportunity to see some examples of multimedia being used in courses currently. And then we'll discuss some of the challenges that accessibility poses in instructional design, specifically multimedia, and some trends and technology today. So backwards design. Before we start the summary of the process, I'd just like to get a brief poll. Actually, first, before we do that, let me just mention that research shows that the use of multimedia in a course can contribute to successful student achievement. However, when you are developing multimedia, you want it to be intentional and purposeful rather than flashy or it's there because it looks good. Students want multimedia that's going to support course content. And when you're using the backwards design model, it's not only a best practice for course development overall, but it's also a best practice for multimedia creation as well. So, as I mentioned before, we're going to do a quick poll. Before we give you the definition of backwards design, we'd like to see what you think backwards design is. So in the chat, if you can chat, type in either answer 1, 2, or 3, and let us know what you think backwards design is. And we'll give you about 10 seconds. I see some answers, or one answer coming in. Anyone else? Awesome. Thank you guys for participating. So most of you guys that did participate chose answer 3, which is the correct one. Backwards design does start with the end goal in mind, and then you work backwards to develop the rest of the course curriculum, from assessments to learning activity, instruction, and whatnot. This process has been found to be very efficient and ensures a student-centered course that is high quality and creates authentic, engaging assessments. If you look at the map there, when you're thinking about traveling, as an example, you're going to start with the end destination, which in this case is New York, and you're going to work backwards to select the travel route that best fits your plan for reaching that destination, all the way to the beginning, which is somewhere in Southern California. And that's a bit how backwards design works. And it also ensures that you're catching any issues that could be potentially come up for students throughout that process. All right, we have another chat feature here. You guys are going to participate a lot, so just get ready. Get your typing fingers ready. Backwards design is broken into 3 stages, and we like to see if you know of the 3 stages, which are in the correct order. So you can type in choice 1, 2, or 3, and we'll give you guys about 10, 15 seconds to do that. So I see some choice 3s and some choice 1s. Awesome. So thank you guys again for participating. If you selected choice 1, you selected the correct answer. Here in stage 1, you want to identify the desired results. So in this case, for those that would be developing courses, those would be the course learning outcomes. In stage 2, you want to design or determine the acceptable evidence. In this case, it would be assessments, which are essentially how you're measuring if students are achieving those course learning outcomes. And then finally, you want to plan learning experiences and instruction, which would be the learning activities. This would also be any lectures, instruction that you want that will help prepare students to complete those assessments successfully, and again, ultimately achieve the learning outcomes for the course, or skills and knowledge you want students to gain by the end of the course. All right, multimedia creation. So we want to talk about what the research says before we talk about how multimedia creation integrates into the backwards design process, because we want to back up why we recommend this process here. Again, before we do that, I want to see what you think the impact is of the use of multimedia. So you can type in very impactful, somewhat impactful, or it depends. And I'll give you guys about 10, 15 seconds to do that. Lots of depends here. Awesome. Well, everybody that participated selected the correct answer. It does depend. It is very impactful as long as the multimedia you create is purposeful and intentional. And Jeff here is going to show you how impactful it can be when you use purposeful media. So Jeff, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much. So there is a substantial amount of research out there in the world that backs up the idea that well-designed media can affect learning outcomes in a very positive way. It can also affect it in a negative way if we're not careful, resulting in cognitive overload, confusion, and exactly where you don't want to go with media. We have 3 that we can talk about briefly today. The U.S. Department of Education conducted a meta-analysis of many studies focusing primarily on the data-driven quantitative analysis, and I'll talk about those findings shortly. E-learning and the science of instruction, if there is a seminal piece of work for multimedia designers or faculty who are interested in putting media into courses, this would be the book. This is by Richard Mayer and Ruth Clark. Richard Mayer came up with 12 principles that anyone can follow in creating effective multimedia. He has up to, I think, a 2016 publication that focuses more on course design within the classroom. So if anyone is interested, I highly recommend this book. It will make a lot of sense to you, and we'll talk briefly about that. And then Dr. Boris Saxberg came to Ashford to give a presentation a number of years ago, and he used the 12 principles from Mayer's works and tested them in the Kaplan classes that he had available to him, and I'll speak to those results all right in a moment. The U.S. Department of Education, in their meta-analysis, they discovered a number of studies that showed even the simplest controls of media can engage students further. In other words, we know video as a passive experience, and passive experiences are prone to any sort of distractions, delays. Students, just stop watching it after a while. It's passive. But if you have a video that can be indexed, so they can, intentionally move and rewind to areas that were of interest to them or they're not quite understanding, that improved learning outcomes alone. So essentially, the more interaction students have with their learning, these were other studies pulling this in, the better their learning outcomes were achieved. As far as the e-learning and science of instruction, you can see some of the principles on the left listed in the table: multimedia principle, contiguity principle, coherence, modality. He has all these cool names, but they all pertain to very specific design elements of media. And Dr. Boris Saxberg had done his studies, and on the chart on the right, you can see how meaningful one standard deviation of change above the mean was. In fact, it moved students from a 50 percentile in grade up to an 80+ percentile in grade. So extremely impactful. This is as compared to just a straight lecture from faculty. The media on the left, back to the left, I've added the effect sizes to that, each principle. The multimedia principle sounds amazingly common sense. Use relevant graphics and text to communicate content. But of course, right? But so often that is confused with his coherence principle, which also had a large effect size of 1.3 standard deviations. Avoid irrelevant graphics, stories, videos, media, and lengthy text. So unfortunately, what people do is when they're creating the media, they put in too much text, or they speak directly to the text verbatim that's on the screen, and it's all highly distracting because Dr. Mayer showed that there are channels of processing that people use, and you need to divide the content among those different channels. You can't overwhelm one channel and expect students to, say, visually reflect on a graphic on the screen. That's why Steve Jobs' presentations tend to be effective, because he would have a graphic and speak to it, or minimal text, that type of thing. So those principles all come from the book. I highly recommend it. Dr. Boris Saxberg has shown in his early research that they're very effective in the classroom, and our goal is to use these kinds of principles in designing media for our students in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for that information. As I mentioned before, we want to make sure that we back up what we're saying about using multimedia intentionally, and this research definitely proves that. So multimedia creation, as promised, we're going to talk about how that fits into the backwards design process. One more chat here for you guys before we talk about it. Where do you think multimedia creation fits? You can say all stages, or you can say stages 2 and 3. I'll give you guys about 10 seconds to do that. All right, I see a few here. Looks like most are selecting all. There are a few stages of 2 and 3, but it really is all stages, and we're going to explain why that is. In stage 1, while you're not necessarily creating the multimedia piece right then and there, you do want to think about, as you're thinking about your ideas, how the multimedia piece you're thinking about is going to align with the course learning outcomes. As Jeff mentioned, aligning multimedia assets to course learning outcomes will contribute to student achievement and it increases engagement. Students want multimedia assets that are going to support the content, help them understand the material that they're learning so that they can complete those assessments and learning activities successfully. In stages 2 and 3, this is where you're going to primarily design the multimedia pieces, and we do have a process for that. But what you'll find here, and we'll show you some examples, is that multimedia assets could be assessments. We have some programs that we use that can be integrated into Canvas that are gradable. They could support the assessments and learning activities as well, or they can be part of that, those assessments as well as a combo. So for our first example, we're going to show you a course that Jeff and I had an opportunity to work with one of the faculty developers to revise. And this course is a crime scene investigation course, or actually a forensics course. But at the end of the course, the faculty developer wanted to have students create a crime scene analysis report. And what she did was she wanted to align some multimedia assets that will help students be able to do that. So on the left-hand side here, you see the course learning outcomes for the course. And then here, you see the final project or the assessment, which was the report, and technically 2 different multimedia assets and 1 alternative. And we'll talk about why that is alternative. So I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint so I can show you guys this example. So here's the crime scene evidence analysis report. And here you see, this report is aligned to all of the CLOs for the course. And we have this video. This video was created as a scenario-based video to allow students to see why they're completing this project and also get an idea of what it would be like real world to have to go and investigate a crime scene. So I'm just going to play a clip here. Yeah. And hopefully you guys will be able to see it. I thought I had it set up at the right clip, so here we go.
The officers notice a television in the corner of the briefing room, which cuts to breaking news and shows a picture of a car surrounded by crime scene tape.
Breaking news right off the top. Police have found a vehicle that may be connected to a double homicide that occurred early in the morning at about 3 a.m. The vehicle was beside Road 77. Let's go to our correspondent on the scene.
All right, so one of the things that we do, and we'll just briefly show you this, is that we do use storyboarding whenever we are creating a multimedia asset. And this storyboarding allows us to be able to break down each screen in the video or interactive module, any script, any text that will be on the screen when certain things appear. And so you're going to have an instructional designer and typically for the videos, our video producer to help create the storyboard with your vision in mind for videos. Now, the other thing that we wanted to show was the second part to this project, which is a 3D simulation here. And this was created by another ed tech specialist. And and this simulation allowed you to be able to walk through the home and investigate evidence. You can see I'm walking backwards right now. You can investigate evidence. I can interact with characters here. And this will give students a real-world opportunity to see what it's like to actually go in and investigate a crime scene short of doing it in the real world. Now, the only challenge with this interactive activity was that it wasn't really fully 100% accessible. And give me just a second while I close out of it. Where's my mouse? There you go. So what we did is we took a storyboard that we used and made it an alternative, accessible, interactive that students could kind of just look at and tab through in order to still investigate the crime scene without actually using the simulation, because we wanted to make sure that students who may not be able to use that simulation for whatever disability reason still had got an opportunity to experience the same thing, just in a different format. So you can see I'm following the blue line, and if a student was using a screen reader, they would follow this blue line to investigate everything that needed to be investigated at the crime scene. I'm going to go back to the presentation here and also point out that not only did the developer use multimedia assets for the final project, but also scaffolded multimedia assets at key points in the course to ensure that not only the students understand the course content in those respective weeks, but also could help them prepare for completing this final project. And so these two activities here were developed as learning activities on their own, so students could learn that content that was being taught in that week. So scaffolding is a good best practice if you're looking to strategically place multimedia assets in the course. So these next few examples, I'm just going to briefly talk about, go over some other aspects, multimedia assets that were used in alignment with the course learning outcome. This first one was the H5P drag and drop and multiple choice interactive that was used in conjunction with the weekly lecture or lesson. So students had an opportunity to practice the content that they were learning before they completed the discussion forum. These next two examples are interactive modules that were created so that students could practice coding a system for medical procedures, as well as practice identifying key milestones of the human evolution. And these last two were videos that provided contextual information about the content so that they'd be able to complete the assignment in the discussion forum. So I'm going to just show you those right quick. We have the H5P here. We have the build a code, coding practice, and the evolution. And then we have the videos here. And these videos, when I pulled the data, they had very high playthrough ratios. So we know that students were watching these videos and it was helping them be able to complete the assignments for those weeks. All right, moving on to best practices. I know I got a few minutes here, so I'm gonna try to quickly go through this. Multimedia best practices creation. We already mentioned that you want to align any multimedia to course learning outcomes. Essentially, how is this multimedia not only going to help students complete the assignment or assessment, but achieve the learning outcomes? Consider the audience, meaning use a universal design so that all students can use the multimedia effectively. And use multimedia to support course content and not distract. If it's a large chunk of multimedia, consider breaking it up into bite-sized chunks so that you can avoid cognitive overload. Ask for the data. If you have an idea of a multimedia asset that has been used previously and you want to see how effective it is, ask for the data. Xavier has our learning tech team has 3 platforms that we use: Kaltura, Power BI, and Google Analytics, that allows us to see how multimedia assets are being performed. For design practices, we recommend that videos should be 3 minutes or less. We did look at the top enrolled courses at Ashford University and found that on average, videos were about 3.25 minutes, and there were a few outliers in that. And then you can see some of the recommended types of videos there, as well as keeping accessibility in mind. And all of this is in a job aid that we're going to link in the chat, so you'll get an opportunity to see that. And then finally, for storyboarding, storyboarding is just the blueprint for how you want the layout, flow, the navigation of the multimedia asset to look. And again, in the job aid, you're going to have a link to a video that shows you how to use a specific type of storyboard and some example interactive. All right, now I got a few minutes here, so technology trends here. Here, we know that extended reality, including virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality are becoming a big theme in educational technology. You saw some example of that today. You also saw an example of that yesterday. Augmented reality specifically is training to become the next MOOC, so a massive open online course because of the ability to set up vocational training using that type of technology. Artificial intelligence can improve accessibility. If you've ever used Grammarly, if you've used Siri, Google Assistant, those are examples of artificial intelligence in use today, as well as a Seeing AI app developed by Microsoft, which narrates the world around you. And then 5G is just a higher level of connectivity, network connectivity that can be used, especially for students that may live in rural areas who may not have a high connectivity using a Wi-Fi network. In fact, it's 40 times as powerful, times stronger than a Wi-Fi network. And then finally, Generation Z. Those students are coming. We may not see those students right now, but they're coming, and they're expecting the use of technology and access to the content they need readily available. And then lastly, in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I just want to briefly go over some accessibility challenges. Creating accessible multimedia assets is a universal design best practice, but it has to be planned and not an afterthought. As you're developing a multimedia piece, you want to be thinking about ways to make it accessible or universally used by all students. In fact, a recent study that came out at the end of October by the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, said that using captions and interactive transcripts actually improves student performance by 3% and 8% respectively. So it's beneficial for all students. But even with that, there are some technologies out there that may not have or limited accessibility features. So if that's the case, you can work with your instructional designer and ed technologist to get that information or be able to design alternatives in that case. And then also consider the cost to use these technological resources, not just monetarily, but manpower and available resources. And that is the end of our presentation. I am going to post in the chat the link to the job aid. And we have a couple of minutes for questions, if anybody has any.
Just as anyone's typing in any questions, just want to let you know that media can be designed, but it's already been designed also. So keep in mind that there are resources on the web, especially as Ashford moves towards a nonprofit status. Fair use becomes even more relevant, and there's a lot of content. Google alone has an arts and culture section that will blow your mind. It has 360-degree sphericals of experience of its different areas. Could be an archaeological dig, could be a historic site, as well as others, such as street tours of, they're not really street tours, they're using that technology in museums. So there are a lot of ways to experience the world, and you can use those to set up your discussions and assignments as well.
Awesome. And Bonita, I believe that Deb, she will be setting it up so that you can get a copy of the presentation. The session is being recorded, so you can share with others. And as I mentioned before, I did link the job aid in the chat, so you have that as well. And you're welcome, everybody. Thank you for allowing us to be able to present to you, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne and Jeff. We appreciate the wealth of knowledge that you shared regarding the backwards design process and the value of multimedia creation, videos, best practices. Wonderful presentation. Thank you for your hard work. And thanks to everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of TLC. We do have a keynote speaker coming up later today.